Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stared at the stack of documents on her desk. The air conditioning in the small translation office had broken again, and the summer heat in downtown Los Angeles made everything feel sticky and uncomfortable. She had been working as a freelance translator for 8 years, mostly handling boring business contracts and immigration papers. People always introduced her the same way at parties. "This is Maria, she's just a translator." The word "just" always stung a little, as if translating between languages was simple work that anyone could do. Maria spoke 5 languages fluently and had a master's degree in linguistics, but somehow her work was always dismissed as unimportant. She had grown used to being invisible, the person in the background who made communication possible while others took credit for the big decisions. That Tuesday morning in July started like any other. Maria arrived at her small office at 7 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to tackle another pile of documents. Her biggest client, Henderson International, had sent over a new batch of files that needed translation from Spanish to English. The company worked with manufacturing plants across Latin America, and Maria had been translating their correspondence for 3 years. She opened the first file and immediately noticed something different. Instead of the usual shipping manifests and quality control reports, these documents contained detailed chemical formulas and production schedules. The papers were from a factory in Guatemala that produced industrial cleaning supplies for hospitals and schools across Central America. Maria's grandmother had been a chemistry teacher, and she had spent countless summers learning about different compounds and reactions. As she began translating the technical specifications, something caught her eye. The chemical formula listed for their main disinfectant product didn't look right. She double-checked the original Spanish text, thinking she might have made an error. The formula was definitely wrong. According to the documents, the factory was mixing sodium hypochlorite with ammonia-based compounds. Maria's heart started racing as she remembered her grandmother's warnings about household chemicals. These two substances should never be mixed together because they create chloramine gas, which is extremely dangerous to breathe. She tried to calm herself down, thinking maybe she had misunderstood something. Perhaps there were safety measures in place that she couldn't see from the documents. But as she continued translating, her concern grew stronger. The production schedule showed that thousands of gallons of this dangerous mixture were being produced every week and shipped to hospitals, schools and clinics throughout Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Maria picked up her phone to call her contact at Henderson International, then hesitated. She was just the translator. It wasn't her job to question the technical content of the documents she translated. Her job was simply to convert Spanish words into English words and send them back to the client. She had no formal training in chemistry or manufacturing safety protocols, but she couldn't stop thinking about all the people who would be exposed to this dangerous chemical mixture. Hospital workers, janitors, teachers, and countless others who had no idea they were working with something that could seriously harm them. The cleaning product was marketed as safe and eco-friendly, but the reality was far different. Maria spent her lunch break researching chloramine gas exposure online. What she found made her stomach turn. The gas could cause severe respiratory problems, chemical burns to the lungs, and even death in enclosed spaces. Children and elderly people were especially vulnerable. She thought about all the schools and hospitals that would be using this product, trusting that it was safe. By afternoon, she had made up her mind. She couldn't just ignore what she had discovered, even if it meant overstepping her role as a translator. She carefully documented her findings, printing out the relevant sections of the documents and highlighting the dangerous chemical combinations. She also printed out scientific articles about chloramine gas poisoning to support her concerns. Maria knew that speaking up could cost her the Henderson International contract, which provided nearly 40% of her income. The company might see her as difficult or unprofessional for questioning their clients' manufacturing processes, but she also knew that staying silent could cost lives. As she prepared to make the phone call that would change everything, Maria realized that being just a translator had actually put her in a unique position. She was often the first person to see documents from different countries and companies. She had access to information that others might miss, and her language skills allowed her to understand nuances that automated translation programs would never catch. The phone rang twice before Tom Henderson answered. "Maria, good to hear from you. How are those Guatemala files coming along?" His voice was friendly and relaxed, completely unaware of what she was about to tell him. Maria took a deep breath and began explaining what she had found in the chemical formulas. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Tom's voice changed completely. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" he asked, his casual tone replaced by urgent concern. Maria walked him through her analysis, explaining why the chemical combination was dangerous and showing him the research she had done during her lunch break. "My God," Tom whispered. "If you're right about this, we need to act immediately. How many facilities are using this product?" Maria quickly scanned through the shipping records she had been translating. Based on these documents, the contaminated batches have been shipped to at least 50 different locations over the past 6 months. The weight of the discovery hit both of them at the same time. This wasn't just a small mistake in a manufacturing process. This was a potentially deadly situation that was affecting hospitals, schools, and clinics across 3 different countries. Maria had stumbled onto something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Tom Henderson wasted no time after Maria's phone call. Within an hour, he had assembled an emergency meeting with Henderson International's senior management team and their legal department. Maria found herself sitting in a conference room that she had only seen from the outside during her occasional visits to drop off translated documents. The mahogany table was polished to a mirror shine, and the walls were lined with awards and certificates that spoke to the company's success over the past 2 decades. Maria felt completely out of place among the executives in their expensive suits. But Tom introduced her as the person who may have just saved us from a major catastrophe. She carefully presented her findings again, this time to a room full of people who hung on every word. The company's chief legal officer, Sandra Mills, asked detailed questions about the chemical formulas and the potential health risks. "We need to verify this information immediately," Sandra said, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling our contact at the Environmental Protection Agency. If Maria is correct, this situation could result in criminal charges against everyone involved, including us as the importing company." While Sandra made her calls, Tom pulled Maria aside. "I need you to translate every single document from this Guatemala facility, going back as far as you have records. Look for any mention of safety testing, quality control, or chemical analysis. We need to understand how long this has been going on and whether anyone at the factory knows about the problem." Maria nodded, but she had a sinking feeling in her stomach. "Tom, what if they do know? What if this isn't an accident?" The thought had been nagging at her since she first discovered the dangerous formula. The chemicals weren't just randomly mixed together. Someone had specifically chosen to combine sodium hypochlorite with ammonia compounds, despite the well-known dangers of this combination. Tom's face grew dark. "Then we're not just looking at negligence. We're looking at something much worse." He paused, staring out the conference room window at the busy street below. "Maria, I need to ask you something important. Are you willing to work with federal investigators on this case? What you've discovered could be evidence in a criminal investigation." The question caught Maria off guard. She had started the day thinking she would spend 8 hours translating routine business documents. Now she was being asked to potentially testify in a federal case. "I don't know anything about criminal investigations," she said quietly. "I'm just a translator." "No," Tom said firmly. "You're the person who recognized a deadly chemical combination that dozens of other people missed. You're the person who decided to speak up even though it wasn't your job. That makes you much more than just a translator." Over the next 3 days, Maria worked around the clock translating every document Henderson International had received from the Guatemala facility. Over the past 2 years, she discovered that the dangerous chemical formula had been in use for 8 months, but there were earlier documents that showed the factory had been experimenting with different combinations for over a year. What disturbed her most was finding several emails between factory managers discussing ways to reduce production costs. One email, dated 6 months earlier, specifically mentioned that switching to cheaper cleaning compounds would save the company nearly 30% on raw materials. The writer of the email seemed to know that the new formula was problematic, mentioning that regulatory agencies in Guatemala don't test finished products very thoroughly. Maria's hands shook as she translated that particular email. It suggested that someone at the factory knew they were producing a dangerous product but decided to continue anyway because they could get away with it. She immediately called Tom, who conference called Sandra Mills and an EPA investigator named Agent Rodriguez. "This changes everything," Agent Rodriguez said, after Maria read him the translated email. "We're no longer looking at accidental negligence. This appears to be intentional production of a hazardous substance with knowledge of the risks involved. Maria, I need you to prepare official translations of these documents for use in court proceedings." The next morning, Maria received a call that changed her understanding of the situation completely. Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Guatemala Ministry of Health was calling about the cleaning product investigation. Through Maria's translation, Dr. Vasquez explained that 3 hospital workers in Guatemala City had been hospitalized with severe respiratory problems over the past month. All 3 had been using the industrial disinfectant in poorly ventilated areas. "We couldn't understand what was causing their symptoms," Dr. Vasquez said in Spanish, with Maria translating for Tom and Agent Rodriguez on the conference call. "The product was supposed to be safe, and we had no reason to suspect it was dangerous. If you hadn't discovered this chemical problem, we might never have made the connection." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. People were already getting sick from the product she had identified as dangerous. The situation wasn't just theoretical anymore. Real people in real hospitals were suffering because of the contaminated cleaning supplies. Dr. Vasquez continued with more disturbing news. "We've identified 47 medical facilities and 32 schools that have been using this product. We're in the process of contacting all of them to stop using it immediately. But some facilities may have already disposed of their supplies. We don't know how many people may have been exposed." Agent Rodriguez asked Dr. Vasquez about the 3 hospitalized workers. Their conditions were serious but stable. All 3 were expected to recover, but they would likely have long-term respiratory problems. One was a 23-year-old janitor who had been working at the hospital for only 2 months. Another was a 55-year-old nurse who had been using the cleaning product to disinfect patient rooms. After the call ended, Maria sat in her small office feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had uncovered. She had always thought of her work as routine and unimportant, but now she realized that her position as a translator had given her access to information that could save lives. She wasn't just converting words from one language to another. She was serving as a bridge between different countries and cultures, and sometimes that bridge carried crucial information that no one else would see. Tom called her that evening with an update from the EPA investigation. "They've traced the contaminated cleaning supplies to over 60 locations across 3 countries," he said. "The Guatemala facility has been shut down pending a full investigation, and Interpol is getting involved because this crosses international borders." Maria asked the question that had been haunting her all day. "How many people do you think were exposed?" Tom was quiet for a long moment before answering. "We don't know yet, but based on the shipping records you translated, it could be hundreds, maybe more than 1,000 when you count all the patients, students, and staff at the affected facilities." The responsibility felt crushing. If Maria hadn't noticed the chemical formula error, the dangerous cleaning supplies would have continued to be used for months or even years. More people would have gotten sick. Some might have died, especially if the product had been used in enclosed spaces with poor ventilation. Maria realized that her decision to speak up, despite feeling like it wasn't her place, had potentially prevented a major public health disaster. The FBI field office in downtown Los Angeles was nothing like the sleek buildings Maria had seen in movies. The walls were a dull beige color, and the fluorescent lights hummed constantly overhead. Agent Sarah Chen, who had taken over the international aspects of the case, led Maria through a maze of cubicles to a small conference room where several other investigators were waiting. "Ms. Santos, thank you for coming in," Agent Chen said, pulling out a thick folder of documents. "We've been working with authorities in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to track down everyone involved in this chemical contamination. Your translations have been crucial to our investigation, but we need to dig deeper into some of the documents you've already worked on." Maria nodded, though she felt nervous being surrounded by federal agents. She had never been involved in anything like this before, and the seriousness of the situation was overwhelming. Agent Chen spread several documents across the table, all of them covered in Maria's neat handwriting where she had provided English translations of the original Spanish text. "We've discovered that the Guatemala facility wasn't operating independently," Agent Chen explained. "There's a network of chemical companies across Central America that have been sharing information about how to cut costs in their manufacturing processes. Some of the emails you translated mention conferences and meetings where these companies exchanged ideas about cheaper ingredient substitutions. Maria leaned forward to examine the documents more carefully. She had translated dozens of emails over the past week, and many of them had seemed like routine business correspondence. But now, seeing them laid out together, she could see patterns that she had missed before. This email here, Agent Chen pointed to a document dated 3 months earlier, mentions a meeting in San Salvador where representatives from 6 different chemical companies discussed alternative formulations for maximum profit margins. Can you walk us through exactly what this says in Spanish? Maria read through the original email carefully. The Spanish text was full of technical terms and business jargon, but the meaning was becoming clearer as she studied it in the context of the larger investigation. The writer is talking about a presentation where someone demonstrated how switching to ammonia-based compounds could reduce costs by 40%, she explained. But there's also a phrase here that I initially translated as minor compatibility issues. Looking at it again, I think it might be better translated as slight mixing problems. Agent Chen's eyes widened. That suggests they knew there were problems with mixing these chemicals, but they chose to minimize the risks. She made notes on a legal pad, then pulled out another document. What about this email from the company president? You translated part of it as regulatory oversight is limited, but I want to make sure we understand the exact meaning. Maria studied the document again, paying careful attention to the subtle implications of the Spanish phrasing. Actually, the exact translation would be closer to regulatory oversight is practically non-existent. The word practicamente makes it stronger than I originally indicated. He's not just saying oversight is limited, he's saying there's basically no oversight at all. The revelation that multiple companies across Central America had been deliberately producing dangerous chemical products was staggering. Agent Chen explained that the investigation had expanded to include facilities in 4 countries, and early estimates suggested that over 200,000 people might have been exposed to hazardous cleaning products over the past year. The good news is that most of the exposure was limited, Agent Chen said. These products were primarily used for surface cleaning, not in enclosed spaces where people would breathe concentrated fumes. But we've identified at least 15 cases of serious respiratory illness that appear to be directly linked to these contaminated products. Maria thought about the 3 hospital workers Dr. Vasquez had mentioned, plus 12 others who had been identified in Honduras and El Salvador. All of them were people just trying to do their jobs, cleaning hospitals and schools to keep other people safe. They had no idea they were being exposed to dangerous chemicals because of corporate greed and regulatory failures. Agent Chen continued briefing Maria on the expanding investigation. We've also discovered that some of these companies were specifically targeting institutions that serve vulnerable populations. Hospitals, nursing homes, schools, and daycare centers were getting the cheapest versions of the cleaning products, which happened to be the most dangerous formulations. The targeting of vulnerable populations made Maria angry in a way she hadn't expected. It was one thing for companies to cut corners to increase profits, but deliberately putting children, elderly people, and sick patients at risk was something else entirely. She thought about her own daughter, who attended elementary school in East Los Angeles. What if her school had been using these dangerous cleaning products? There's something else we need to discuss, Agent Chen said, her tone becoming more serious. Some of the people involved in this chemical contamination scheme have become aware that their communications are being investigated. We have reason to believe they might try to destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses. As the person who first identified the problem, you could potentially be targeted. Maria felt her heart rate increase. She hadn't considered that her involvement in the investigation might put her in danger. What kind of targeting are you talking about? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Probably nothing physical, Agent Chen reassured her. More likely they would try to discredit your translations or claim that you misunderstood the technical information. They might also try to pressure Henderson International to stop cooperating with the investigation. We want you to be aware of these possibilities and to contact us immediately if anyone approaches you about the case. Over the next 2 weeks, Maria continued working closely with federal investigators to translate additional documents that were being seized from chemical companies across Central America. Each new batch of emails and reports revealed more details about the scope of the contamination scheme. It wasn't just one factory making a mistake. It was a coordinated effort by multiple companies to reduce costs by using dangerous chemical combinations. With full knowledge of the health risks involved, the most disturbing discovery came when Maria translated a document from a company in Honduras that had been experimenting with even more dangerous chemical combinations. They had been mixing industrial solvents with household bleach to create an even cheaper cleaning product. According to the company's own internal testing, this combination could cause severe skin burns and permanent lung damage with even brief exposure. They were essentially creating chemical weapons disguised as cleaning supplies, Agent Chen said after Maria finished translating the Honduras documents. If these products had made it to market, we could have been looking at hundreds of deaths instead of just serious injuries. Maria realized that her discovery had prevented something much worse than she had originally imagined. The Guatemala facility that Henderson International was working with was actually one of the less dangerous operations in the network. Other companies in the scheme had been developing products that were potentially lethal, and they had plans to distribute them throughout Central America and potentially into the United States market. As she drove home from the FBI office that evening, Maria thought about how dramatically her life had changed in just 3 weeks. She had started the month as an invisible translator working on routine business documents. Now she was a key witness in an international criminal investigation that could result in criminal charges against dozens of people and potentially save thousands of lives. But she also realized that her work was far from over. The investigation was expanding into other countries, and there were hundreds of additional documents that needed careful translation. Maria was no longer just converting words from Spanish to English. She was helping uncover a conspiracy that threatened the health and safety of people across multiple countries, and her linguistic skills were the key to understanding the full scope of the crimes that had been committed. Maria's life became a whirlwind of court documents, witness statements, and secure phone calls with investigators across 3 countries. Her small translation office was no longer adequate for the volume of sensitive documents she was handling, so the FBI had set up a secure workspace for her in their field office. Every morning she passed through metal detectors and security checkpoints that reminded her how serious the situation had become. The breakthrough in the case came when Maria was translating emails from a chemical company in El Salvador, hidden in what appeared to be routine correspondence about shipping schedules. She found coded references to something called Project Clean Slate. The emails mentioned meetings with government officials and discussions about ensuring regulatory compliance through alternative channels. Agent Chen. "I think I've found something important," Maria said, calling the lead investigator over to her temporary desk. "These emails aren't really about chemical manufacturing. They're talking about bribing government officials to avoid safety inspections." Agent Chen studied the translated documents carefully. The Spanish text was deliberately vague, using euphemisms and coded language to disguise the true meaning of the conversations. But Maria's deep understanding of both languages allowed her to recognize the subtle implications that automated translation software would never catch. This phrase here, facilitation payments for expedited processing, that's a common euphemism for bribes in business correspondence, Maria explained. And when they talk about ensuring smooth regulatory pathways, they're referring to paying officials to look the other way during inspections. The corruption angle added an entirely new dimension to the investigation. It wasn't just a matter of companies cutting corners to save money. Government officials in multiple countries were being paid to allow dangerous products to reach the market without proper safety testing. The conspiracy reached much higher levels than anyone had initially suspected. Agent Chen immediately contacted her counterparts in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador to share Maria's discoveries. Within days, investigators in all 3 countries were executing search warrants and making arrests. 2 high-ranking officials in Guatemala's Ministry of Health were taken into custody, along with the Director of Chemical Safety Regulation in Honduras. Maria watched the international news coverage of the arrests with a mixture of pride and anxiety. She had never imagined that her translation work could lead to such dramatic results, but she was also worried about the people who were still suffering from exposure to the contaminated cleaning products. The arrests were satisfying, but they didn't undo the harm that had already been done. Dr. Vasquez called from Guatemala with an update on the medical situation. Through Maria's translation, she reported that the number of confirmed cases of chemical exposure had risen to 28 people across the 3 countries. Most were experiencing respiratory problems that would require ongoing treatment. 3 victims had developed permanent lung scarring that would affect their breathing for the rest of their lives. We're also discovering psychological effects, Dr. Vasquez explained in Spanish, with Maria translating for Agent Chen and the other investigators on the conference call. Many of the victims are hospital workers and teachers who feel betrayed by the institutions they trusted. They thought they were using safe products to protect public health, and instead they were unknowingly poisoning themselves. The psychological impact of the contamination was something Maria hadn't considered before. She thought about the 23-year-old hospital janitor who had been hospitalized during the early stages of the investigation. He had taken the job because he wanted to help people by keeping the hospital clean and safe. Instead, he had been exposed to dangerous chemicals that damaged his lungs and would affect his health for years to come. As the investigation continued to expand, Maria found herself working with documents that revealed the true scope of the chemical contamination network. Companies in 6 different countries had been involved in producing and distributing dangerous cleaning products. The total number of people who had been exposed was estimated to be over 300,000. Though most exposures were brief and didn't result in serious health problems, the most shocking discovery came when Maria translated a document that had been seized from the headquarters of the largest chemical company in the network. It was an internal memo discussing plans to expand their operations into the United States and European markets. The company had been researching regulatory requirements in different countries and developing strategies to introduce their dangerous products to facilities that served even larger populations. They were planning to target American hospitals and schools next, Maria told Agent Chen as she finished translating the expansion memo. According to this document, they believed they could avoid detection by marketing their products as imported eco-friendly alternatives to established American brands. Agent Chen immediately contacted the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to alert them about the potential threat to American facilities. The CDC launched an emergency investigation to determine whether any of the contaminated products had already entered the United States market. Fortunately, the investigation revealed that the scheme had been stopped before any dangerous products reached American consumers. But the close call highlighted how easily the contamination could have spread beyond Central America. If Maria hadn't noticed the chemical formula error in those original documents, the dangerous cleaning products might have eventually been distributed throughout North America and Europe. The number of people affected could have been in the millions instead of hundreds of thousands. The personal toll of the investigation was beginning to affect Maria in ways she hadn't expected. She was having trouble sleeping, and she found herself constantly worrying about the people who had been harmed by the chemicals she had helped identify. Tom Henderson had offered to provide counseling services through his company's employee assistance program. But Maria felt like she needed to stay focused on the translation work until the case was completed. Her daughter noticed the changes in her mother's behavior. 8-year-old Sophia asked why Maria was working so many late nights and why she seemed worried all the time. Maria struggled to explain the situation in terms that her daughter could understand without frightening her. "Remember how I told you that I translate documents from Spanish to English?" Maria said one evening as they ate dinner together. "Well, I found some papers that showed some companies were making cleaning supplies that could hurt people. Now I'm helping the police make sure those bad cleaning supplies don't hurt anyone else." Sophia considered this explanation carefully. "So you're like a detective, but instead of looking for clues, you look for dangerous words?" Maria smiled for the first time in weeks. "That's actually a very good way to think about it. I am looking for dangerous words, and when I find them, I help other people understand what they mean." The conversation with her daughter helped Maria realize how much her work had evolved beyond simple translation. She wasn't just converting words from one language to another anymore. She was interpreting complex technical information, identifying potential threats to public safety, and helping law enforcement officials understand criminal conspiracies that crossed international boundaries. Agent Chen confirmed this perspective during their next meeting. "Maria, you've become much more than a translator in this investigation. You're serving as a cultural interpreter, a technical analyst, and a key witness all at the same time. Your ability to understand the subtleties of business communication in Spanish has been essential to building our case against these companies. As the fourth week of the investigation concluded, Maria realized that her discovery had prevented what could have been one of the largest public health disasters in modern history. The Chemical Contamination Network had been planning to distribute dangerous products to thousands of facilities across multiple continents. The scheme had been stopped just months before it would have expanded beyond Central America to affect millions of people worldwide. The courtroom in Guatemala City was packed with journalists, lawyers, and families of the victims who had been harmed by the contaminated cleaning products. Maria sat in the witness section, nervously reviewing her notes one final time before being called to testify. This was the largest international chemical contamination trial in Central American history, and her testimony would be crucial to securing convictions against the 23 defendants who were charged with crimes ranging from criminal negligence to conspiracy to commit mass poisoning. Defense attorneys had spent weeks trying to discredit Maria's translations, arguing that she wasn't qualified to interpret technical chemical documentation. They brought in their own translation experts who claimed that the dangerous chemical formulas she had identified were actually harmless variations of standard cleaning compounds. But Agent Chen and the prosecution team had prepared Maria thoroughly for these attacks on her credibility. Ms. Santos, the lead prosecutor, began as Maria took the witness stand. Please tell the court about your educational background and professional experience in translation services. Maria spoke clearly into the microphone, explaining her master's degree in linguistics and her 8 years of professional translation work. She also mentioned her childhood exposure to chemistry through her grandmother's teaching, which had helped her recognize the dangerous chemical combinations. The prosecutor then asked Maria to walk the court through her discovery of the contaminated cleaning formula. She carefully explained how she had noticed that the chemical combination didn't match standard safety protocols, and how her research had confirmed that mixing sodium hypochlorite with ammonia compounds creates deadly chloramine gas. The defendant's own documents show that they were aware of these dangers, Maria testified, referring to the emails she had translated during the investigation. In several communications, company executives discussed the health risks of their products but decided to continue production anyway because they could avoid regulatory oversight. The defense attorney's cross-examination was aggressive and personal. He questioned whether Maria had the technical expertise to understand complex chemical manufacturing processes. He suggested that her translations were biased because she was being paid by the American company that had hired her. He even implied that she had deliberately mistranslated documents to make the defendants look guilty. Mrs. Santos, isn't it true that you're not a licensed chemist and have no formal training in industrial chemical production? The defense attorney asked. Maria had expected this line of questioning and remained calm in her response. That's correct, I'm not a chemist, she answered. But I didn't need to be a chemist to recognize that the defendants were deliberately mixing chemicals that they knew were dangerous. Their own emails, which I translated accurately, clearly show that they understood the health risks but chose to ignore them for financial reasons. The prosecutor's redirect examination allowed Maria to present the most damaging evidence against the defendants. She read aloud from her translations of internal company emails that discussed ways to avoid safety inspections and maximize profits by using cheaper, more dangerous chemical combinations. One email, written by the president of the largest chemical company, explicitly stated that regulatory agencies don't have the resources to test our products thoroughly, so we can get away with cost-cutting measures that might not pass safety standards in more developed countries. The impact of Maria's testimony was obvious from the defendants' reactions. Several of them looked visibly uncomfortable as she read their own words back to them in court. The defense team had spent months preparing challenges to her technical qualifications, but they had no response to the clear evidence of intentional wrongdoing that emerged from their client's own communications. Dr. Vasquez testified after Maria, providing medical evidence about the 28 confirmed victims of chemical exposure. She explained how the contaminated cleaning products had caused severe respiratory problems, chemical burns, and permanent lung damage in people who had been trying to maintain clean, safe environments in hospitals and schools. The defendants marketed these products as safe and eco-friendly, Dr. Vasquez testified through an official court translator. Healthcare workers and teachers trusted that they were using products that would protect public health, not endanger it. The betrayal of that trust has caused not only physical harm, but also psychological trauma for people who dedicated their careers to helping others. The most emotional testimony came from Carlos Mendez, the 23-year-old hospital janitor who had been among the first victims identified during the investigation. He spoke about the months of respiratory therapy he had undergone and the permanent lung scarring that would affect his breathing for the rest of his life. He also discussed the financial hardship his family faced because he could no longer work full-time due to his breathing difficulties. I took that job because I wanted to help keep the hospital clean and safe for patients, Carlos testified with tears in his eyes. I never imagined that the cleaning supplies I was using every day were slowly poisoning me. These companies stole my health and my ability to provide for my family, all so they could make a few extra dollars on each bottle of cleaning fluid. The trial lasted 6 weeks, with testimony from over 40 witnesses including chemical experts, medical professionals, government officials, and victims of the contamination. Maria's translations of the defendant's internal communications formed the backbone of the prosecution's case, providing clear evidence that the chemical companies had knowingly produced and distributed dangerous products while bribing officials to avoid safety inspections. The verdicts were announced on a Friday morning that Maria would never forget. All 23 defendants were found guilty on multiple charges. The company executives received prison sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. Government officials who had accepted bribes were sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. The chemical companies were ordered to pay over $50 million in fines and victim compensation. Outside the courthouse, Maria was approached by reporters who wanted to interview the translator who cracked the case. She felt uncomfortable with the attention, but Agent Chen encouraged her to speak publicly about the importance of the investigation. I was just doing my job when I noticed something that didn't look right, Maria told the gathered reporters. I never expected that translating some routine business documents would lead to discovering an international conspiracy. But I think this case shows how important it is for people to speak up when they see something dangerous, even if it's not technically their responsibility to do so. Tom Henderson flew down to Guatemala for the verdict announcement and the press conference afterwards. He publicly praised Maria's work and announced that Henderson International was establishing a new safety protocol requiring detailed review of all technical documentation from overseas suppliers. The company was also funding a scholarship program for students studying translation and international business, with a focus on public safety applications. Maria Santos saved lives by being willing to look beyond her job description and take action when she discovered a threat to public safety, Tom said during the press conference. She's not just a translator. She's a public safety hero who prevented what could have been a massive international health disaster. The recognition felt surreal to Maria. Just 2 months earlier, people had been introducing her as just a translator, as if her work didn't matter very much. Now she was being hailed as a hero by international law enforcement agencies and public health officials. The transformation in how others viewed her professional contributions was dramatic. But the most important change was in how Maria viewed herself and the value of her work. As she flew back to Los Angeles after the trial, Maria reflected on how the case had changed her understanding of translation work. She realized that translators often serve as bridges between different cultures, legal systems, and technical fields. They have access to information that others might miss, and their linguistic skills can be crucial for identifying problems that cross international boundaries. The case had also shown her that speaking up about potential dangers was worth the professional risks involved. If she had stayed quiet about the chemical formula problems, hundreds of thousands of people might have continued to be exposed to dangerous products. 6 months after the trial in Guatemala, Maria's life had settled into a new rhythm, but one that was dramatically different from her previous routine. Her small translation office had been replaced by a larger space in a professional building, and she had hired 2 assistant translators to help handle the increased volume of work that had come her way since the chemical contamination case became international news. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in February. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the World Health Organization was calling from Geneva with an urgent request. Through a colleague at the CDC, she had heard about Maria's work on the Central American chemical case and needed her expertise for a new crisis that was developing in Southeast Asia. Ms. Santos, we have a situation in the Philippines that requires someone with your unique combination of translation skills and ability to identify potential public health threats, Dr. Walsh explained. We've received reports of unusual illness patterns in several rural communities, and all the medical documentation is in Tagalog and Spanish. Our regular translators are having difficulty with the technical medical terminology. Maria was intrigued but cautious. The chemical contamination case had been emotionally exhausting, and she wasn't sure she was ready to take on another high-stakes international investigation. But Dr. Walsh's description of the situation made it clear that people were suffering and needed help. "What kind of illness patterns are you seeing?" Maria asked. Even though she didn't speak Tagalog, she had worked on medical translations before and understood that unusual disease clusters often indicated environmental contamination or other public health emergencies. 7 rural communities have reported increased rates of severe anemia, particularly among children and pregnant women, Dr. Walsh replied. The local health officials suspect it might be related to contaminated water sources, but the medical reports are written in a mixture of languages and technical dialects that our current translation team can't fully interpret. Maria agreed to review the initial documents, and within hours she was studying medical reports that had been transmitted securely from WHO headquarters. The Spanish portions of the documents were straightforward to translate, but she quickly realized that understanding the full scope of the health crisis would require collaboration with Tagalog speakers who could help her interpret the local medical terminology. She contacted Dr. Rosa Delgado, a Filipino-American physician who practiced at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. Dr. Delgado had grown up speaking both Tagalog and Spanish and had experience with international public health investigations. Together, they began working through the complex medical documentation from the affected communities. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. Children in 7 different villages were developing severe anemia at rates that were far above normal levels. The affected communities were all located near mining operations that had been established over the past 2 years. Local water sources showed elevated levels of heavy metals, but the mining companies claimed their operations met all environmental safety standards. "This looks familiar," Maria told Dr. Delgado as they studied the mining company's environmental reports. "The language they're using to describe their water treatment processes is very similar to what I saw in the chemical contamination case. They're using technical terminology to make dangerous practices sound safe and compliant." Dr. Delgado agreed that the environmental reports seemed deliberately confusing. "These heavy metal concentrations are definitely high enough to cause the anemia we're seeing, especially in children whose bodies are still developing. But the mining companies are claiming that their filtration systems are preventing contamination of the local water supply." Maria spent the next week translating dozens of internal documents from the mining companies, working with Dr. Delgado to interpret the medical implications of the environmental data. What they discovered was another deliberate conspiracy to hide environmental contamination that was harming public health. The mining companies had been dumping untreated wastewater directly into streams and groundwater sources that supplied drinking water to rural communities. Their environmental reports claimed that sophisticated filtration systems were removing heavy metals from the wastewater, but internal emails revealed that the filtration equipment had never been installed. "They're literally poisoning children to save money on water treatment equipment," Dr. Delgado said after Maria translated a particularly damning email from a mining company executive. "This is criminal negligence on a massive scale." The WHO investigation expanded rapidly once Maria and Dr. Delgado presented their findings. Environmental. Scientists confirmed that water sources in all 7 affected communities contained dangerous levels of lead, mercury, and other heavy metals. Medical teams found that over 200 children were suffering from various stages of heavy metal poisoning, not just anemia. The most heartbreaking aspect of the case was discovering that the health problems had been developing for over a year, but local health officials hadn't been able to identify the source of the contamination because of language barriers and deliberately misleading environmental reports from the mining companies. If we had accurate translations of these documents 6 months ago, we could have prevented most of these children from getting sick, Dr. Walsh told Maria during one of their regular conference calls. Your work is directly saving lives, not just in this case, but by establishing protocols that will help us respond more quickly to similar situations in the future. The Philippines case reinforced Maria's understanding that translation work could have life or death consequences, especially in international public health and environmental safety contexts. She began developing a network of multilingual professionals who could collaborate on complex technical translations that involved public safety issues. Tom Henderson contacted Maria about expanding her work with Henderson International to include proactive safety reviews of all their international suppliers. We want you to review technical documentation from all our overseas partners before we sign any new contracts, Tom explained. Your ability to spot potential problems could prevent future disasters like the chemical contamination case. The proactive approach was exactly what Maria had hoped would result from her work on the Central American case. Instead of waiting for problems to develop, companies were beginning to invest in careful review of technical documentation to identify potential safety issues before they could harm people. Maria's reputation as a translator who could identify public safety threats led to consulting requests from government agencies, international organizations, and private companies around the world. She found herself working on cases involving contaminated food products, defective medical devices, and environmental contamination in over a dozen countries. Each new case reinforced the importance of having skilled translators who understood that their work involved more than just converting words from one language to another. Technical translation required understanding the broader context of the documents being translated and recognizing when seemingly routine information might indicate serious problems. The personal satisfaction Maria derived from her expanded role was immense, but it also came with increased responsibility and stress. She was no longer just translating routine business documents. She was serving as an early warning system for international public health and safety threats, and the weight of that responsibility sometimes felt overwhelming. Her daughter Sophia, now 9 years old, had grown proud of her mother's work and would tell her friends at school that her mom was a detective who speaks different languages. The description wasn't far from the truth. Maria had indeed become a kind of detective, using her linguistic skills to uncover dangerous conspiracies and protect public health. The transformation from being just a translator to being recognized as a crucial component of international safety oversight had taken less than a year, but it felt like a lifetime of change. Maria realized that her work had always been important, but the chemical contamination case had helped her recognize the true value of skilled translation in protecting people from harm. As she prepared to travel to the Philippines to testify in the heavy metals contamination case, Maria reflected on how much her understanding of her profession had evolved. Translation wasn't just about language conversion. It was about building bridges between cultures, legal systems, and technical fields. And sometimes those bridges carried information that could save hundreds of lives. 3 years had passed since Maria first noticed the dangerous chemical formula that changed her life forever. She stood at the podium of the United Nations headquarters in New York, looking out at an audience of diplomats, public health officials, and translation professionals from around the world. The invitation to speak at the UN Conference on International Public Safety had been the culmination of her transformation from an invisible translator to a recognized expert in safety-critical document analysis. Ladies and gentlemen, Maria began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. 3 years ago, I was introduced at parties as just a translator, as if my work didn't really matter. Today, I want to share with you how the work that translators do every day can literally mean the difference between life and death for thousands of people. In the audience, she could see Tom Henderson, Agent Chen, Dr. Walsh, and Dr. Delgado, all of whom had supported her journey from discovering that first dangerous chemical formula to becoming an internationally recognized advocate for safety-critical translation standards. Her daughter Sophia, now 11 years old, sat in the front row with a proud smile on her face. Maria told the story of the Central American chemical contamination case, explaining how her decision to speak up about a suspicious chemical formula had prevented what could have been one of the largest public health disasters in modern history. She described the network of companies that had been deliberately producing dangerous cleaning products and bribing government officials to avoid safety inspections. The final count of people who had been exposed to contaminated cleaning products was over 400,000 across 6 countries, Maria explained to the riveted audience. But because we were able to stop the distribution before it expanded into North America and Europe, we prevented millions of additional exposures. The difference between 400,000 victims and potentially millions of victims came down to one translator who was willing to look beyond her job description and take action when she saw something dangerous. She went on to describe the Philippines heavy metals case, the contaminated medical device investigation in Brazil, and the defective children's toy recall that she had helped coordinate across 12 countries. Each case had reinforced her understanding that translators working with technical documents had a unique responsibility to recognize potential threats to public safety. In the past 3 years, the cases I've worked on have directly prevented harm to an estimated 1.2 million people worldwide, Maria continued. But I'm not telling you this to take credit for preventing these disasters. I'm telling you this because there are thousands of translators around the world who have access to similar information every day, and many of them don't realize the potential impact of their work. The speech had been carefully prepared with help from UN communications specialists, but the most powerful moments came when Maria spoke from the heart about the personal transformation she had experienced. She talked about learning to see herself not just as someone who converted words from one language to another, but as a guardian of public safety who happened to work primarily with linguistic tools. The 28 people who were hospitalized in the chemical contamination case, the 200 children who suffered heavy metal poisoning in the Philippines, the countless others who have been affected by the cases we've worked on, they're not just statistics, Maria said, her voice becoming more emotional. They're real people with families and dreams and futures that were put at risk because companies prioritized profits over human safety. She paused to collect herself, thinking about Carlos Mendez, the young hospital janitor whose lungs had been permanently damaged by contaminated cleaning supplies. He was now working as an advocate for workplace safety rights and had testified before legislators in Guatemala about the need for stronger chemical safety regulations. But this story isn't just about preventing disasters, Maria continued. It's also about recognizing the value and importance of work that society often dismisses as unimportant. Translation, interpretation, and cross-cultural communication are essential functions in our interconnected world. The people who do this work deserve recognition and respect for the crucial role they play in keeping all of us safe. The audience responded with sustained applause. But Maria knew that the real measure of success would be whether her speech led to concrete changes in how technical translation was approached by companies and government agencies around the world. During the question and answer session, a delegate from Sweden asked about the specific protocols that had been developed for identifying safety threats in translated documents. Maria explained the collaborative approach she had pioneered, working with subject matter experts to review technical translations for potential public safety implications. We've established a network of over 200 translators worldwide who specialize in safety-critical document review, Maria answered. When someone encounters a document that might indicate a public safety threat, they can immediately consult with technical experts who can help interpret the implications of what they've found. A representative from the World Health Organization asked about training programs for translators who work with public health documents. Dr. Walsh, who was sitting in the audience, stood up to compliment Maria's answer with information about the new certification program they had developed together. Ms. Santos has been instrumental in creating new training standards for medical and technical translators, Dr. Walsh explained. We're now requiring specialized certification for translators who work on documents related to public health, environmental safety, and consumer product regulation. The final question came from a young woman who identified herself as a recent graduate of a translation studies program. Mrs. Santos, what advice would you give to new translators who want to make a difference in the world, but don't know if their work will ever have the kind of impact you've achieved? Maria smiled, remembering her own feelings of invisibility and unimportance just a few years earlier. My advice is to never underestimate the value of the work you're doing. Every document you translate accurately and every cultural barrier you help people cross is important. You may never know when a routine translation assignment will turn out to contain information that could save lives. She continued with more personal advice. And if you ever encounter something in your work that doesn't look right, something that makes you concerned about safety or harm to others, don't hesitate to speak up. It's not about overstepping your role as a translator. It's about recognizing that your unique position gives you access to information that others might miss. After the formal session ended, Maria was approached by dozens of conference attendees who wanted to learn more about safety-critical translation protocols. She exchanged contact information with government officials from 15 countries who were interested in implementing similar programs in their own agencies. Tom Henderson joined her for lunch after the conference session. "Maria, I have to tell you something," he said as they sat in the UN cafeteria overlooking the East River. "When you first called me about those chemical formulas 3 years ago, I thought we were dealing with a minor manufacturing error that would be resolved in a few weeks. I never imagined it would lead to all of this." Maria looked around at the bustling cafeteria filled with diplomats and international civil servants from around the world. "I never imagined it either. I just knew that something looked dangerous and I couldn't ignore it. That decision to not ignore it has changed how our entire industry approaches safety oversight," Tom replied. "Henderson International now has the most rigorous technical review protocols of any importing company in North America, and our safety record has improved dramatically. But more importantly, you've inspired changes in how translation work is valued and compensated throughout the business community." The personal impact of Maria's work extended far beyond the specific cases she had investigated. Her advocacy for professional recognition of translators had led to salary increases and improved working conditions for thousands of language professionals worldwide. Universities were now offering specialized programs in safety-critical translation, and government agencies were hiring translators as permanent staff members rather than temporary contractors. That evening, Maria called her mother in San Diego to share the details of her UN speech. Her mother, who had always been supportive but never fully understood the importance of translation work, was now one of Maria's biggest advocates. "Mija, I watched the live stream of your speech online," her mother said with pride in her voice. "I called all your aunts and cousins to make sure they watched it too. We always knew you were smart and hardworking, but now the whole world knows how important the work you do really is." As Maria tucked Sophia into bed that night in their hotel room overlooking Central Park, her daughter asked a question that surprised her. "Mom, do you think I might want to be a translator like you when I grow up?" Maria considered the question carefully. "You could be a translator if that's what interests you, but the most important thing is that you find work that makes you feel like you're helping people and making the world a little bit safer and better. That could be translation or medicine or teaching or any number of other careers." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "I think I want to do something that helps people like you do. Maybe I'll be a doctor who works in different countries, or maybe I'll be a translator who helps solve crimes." Maria smiled at her daughter's ambition. "Whatever you choose to do, remember that every job can be important if you do it with care and attention. The most important thing is to always speak up when you see something that could hurt people, even if it's not officially your job to worry about it." As she looked out at the lights of New York City that night, Maria reflected on the incredible journey that had started with a single suspicious chemical formula. She had gone from being just a translator to being recognized as an international expert in public safety oversight. But more importantly, she had learned to value her own work and to understand the crucial role that skilled translators play in keeping the world safe. The final count of lives that had been saved through her work was still growing. New cases were being investigated using the protocol she had helped develop, and other translators around the world were discovering their own suspicious documents that required investigation. What had started as one person's decision to speak up about a dangerous chemical formula had become a global movement to recognize translation as essential work for public safety. Maria Santos was no longer just a translator. She was a guardian of public safety who happened to work primarily with words, and her story had inspired thousands of other language professionals to recognize the true importance and value of their own work.